Before the wound, there was a word. Before the breaking, there was a choosing. Before anything in your life went wrong, before the first person disappointed you, before the first environment diminished you, before the first season stripped you of something you thought you could not survive losing, God had already spoken something over your life that nothing that came after could revoke. Not the betrayal, not the failure, not the years of silence and waiting and carrying things that were never meant to be carried alone. Not even the moments when you looked at yourself honestly and wondered if the person looking back was really someone worth choosing at all. You were chosen before you were broken. And the sequence of those two things matters more than almost anything else I could say to you today. Because the world, and sometimes the church, and sometimes the voice inside your own head, has inverted that sequence in a way that has cost you more than you realize. The world says that choosing follows proving, that you earn your place through performance. That selection is the reward for demonstrated worth, that if you are broken, truly broken, in the places that matter most, then perhaps the choosing has not happened yet. Or perhaps it happened and was subsequently revoked by the evidence of your fractures. But heaven operates on a completely different logic. A logic that does not merely inconvenience the world's system, it demolishes it entirely. God's choosing is not contingent on your condition. It is not a response to your performance or a reward for your consistency or a recognition of your readiness. It is a declaration made before you existed in any form that could be evaluated, before you had demonstrated anything, before you had succeeded or failed at anything, before you had been broken by anything. The choosing came first. Everything else, including the breaking, came after something that was already irrevocably decided, chosen. This is not theology for theology's sake. This is the specific truth that the enemy has worked hardest to keep you from receiving, because he knows what happens when a broken person truly understands that they were chosen before they were broken. He knows that the moment that sequence is restored in your understanding, the moment you stop reading your brokenness as evidence against your choosing and start reading it as something that happened to someone who was already chosen, everything changes. The wound does not disappear, but its authority over the narrative of your life is permanently revoked. This message is that revocation, delivered today, to you, specifically. Let me tell you what happens to a person who believes, at the level of lived conviction, rather than intellectual acknowledgement, that their brokenness came before their choosing, or worse, that their brokenness is the reason the choosing has not yet happened. Or worst of all, that their brokenness is evidence that the choosing was a mistake that God has since reconsidered. It changes everything about how they move through the world. Not dramatically, not in ways that announce themselves or that other people can easily identify, but in the subtle, pervasive, exhausting way that a wrong foundation changes everything built on top of it. You can build a beautiful structure on a cracked foundation. You can paint it and furnish it and invite people inside, and they will admire it genuinely. But you will know, you will always know. Because in the quiet moments, in the moments between the performance and the rest, between the public version and the private one, you will feel the instability beneath everything. The slight but constant anxiety of someone who is building on ground they are not sure will hold. This is what it feels like to live with the inverted sequence. To believe consciously or unconsciously that your worth is something you are still in the process of establishing, that you have not yet arrived at the place where you can simply rest in the reality of being chosen, because the evidence of your brokenness keeps reopening the question of whether the choosing was ever really yours. You work harder than almost everyone around you, not from ambition necessarily, though it can look like ambition from the outside, but from a deep interior engine that is running on the fuel of something that needs to be proven. You cannot quite identify what it is that needs to be proven, or to whom, or what the standard of proof would actually look like if you reached it. But the engine runs, constantly. And the exhaustion it produces is not the good exhaustion of meaningful effort, it is the hollow exhaustion of running a race whose finish line keeps moving. Chosen. There is a specific kind of relationship pattern that emerges when someone operates from the belief that their choosing is conditional on their condition. You become an extraordinary giver, generous beyond what is sustainable. present for everyone, available at costs that you absorb quietly without complaint. You show up for people in their pain with a consistency and a depth that moves them genuinely. And you do this, at least in part, because giving feels like the safest form of existing in relationship, because when you are giving, the question of your worth is temporarily suspended. You are useful, you are needed, you are justified in taking up the space that the relationship requires. But receiving, actually receiving, allowing someone's care and attention and investment to land in the places where you actually need it, this is where everything becomes complicated. Because receiving requires believing that you are worth receiving for. Not for what you can offer in return. Not for what you have already contributed to the relationship, but simply for being who you are. And if who you are feels like someone whose brokenness is still an open question, if the choosing feels conditional and revocable, then receiving feels dangerous. It feels like accepting something under false pretenses, like cashing a check that might bounce, like building on ground that might not hold. And so you give and give and give, and you receive as little as you can manage, and the gap between what you pour out and what you allow in grows wider over time. And the exhaustion deepens, and the loneliness that sits at the center of even your most intimate relationships becomes more pronounced. Not because the people in your life are not trying to reach you, but because the part of you that most needs to be reached has been protected behind a wall, whose original purpose was survival, but whose current function is isolation. This is what the inverted sequence costs. This is what it does to a life, not in one dramatic moment, but in the slow, cumulative, almost invisible erosion of the capacity to simply rest in being loved, to simply receive, to simply be, without the performance, without the proof, without the constant low-grade anxiety of someone who is not sure the ground beneath them will hold if they stop moving long enough to feel it. Here is what I need you to understand about the sequence. About the order in which things happened, about what came first and what that means for everything that came after. The prophet Jeremiah received a word from God that I want to place in front of you, not as a historical curiosity, but as a personal address. God said to him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Read that sequence carefully. Before formation, knowing. Before birth, setting apart. The choosing did not follow the formation, it preceded it. The appointing did not follow the proving, it preceded the existence of anyone who could prove anything. This was not a special dispensation for Jeremiah alone. This was God revealing the logic by which he operates, the sequence by which divine choosing always works. He does not observe and then select. He selects and then forms. He does not evaluate and then appoint. He appoints and then walks with the appointed through the process of becoming someone capable of carrying the appointment. The choosing is always first. The formation, including everything painful and breaking and confusing in the formation, always comes after something that was already decided. Here is the first revelation that I want to anchor in your understanding today. Your brokenness did not disqualify you from being chosen. It is the evidence that you were. This requires a complete inversion of the way most people read their own wounds. Most people read their breaking as evidence against their worth. As the prosecution's exhibit in the case, the internal courtroom is always running against them. But what if the breaking is actually evidence of the opposite? What if the specific places where you were targeted, the specific relationships that fractured you, the specific seasons that stripped you, the specific wounds that went deepest, were targeted precisely because something in you was worth targeting? Because the force that organized the opposition had read the choosing before you did and understood what it meant. The enemy does not waste sophisticated attacks on insignificant targets. He does not organize sustained, multi-layered opposition against lives that pose no threat to his territory. The very intensity of what you have faced, the very depth of the breaking you have survived, is itself a form of confirmation. Not comfortable confirmation, not the kind you would have chosen if given the option, but confirmation nonetheless. You were broken because you were chosen, not despite it. Here is the second revelation. The breaking did not change the choosing, it revealed the depth of it. Gold does not become gold in the fire. It is already gold before the fire begins. The fire simply removes what was not gold, the impurities, the dross, the elements that were never part of the original composition, so that what remains is the pure thing in its most concentrated form. Your breaking did not create something new in you. It revealed something that was always there, the faith that survived the season that should have destroyed it, the compassion that was deepened by the pain that could have hardened it, the capacity for God that expanded precisely in the moments when His presence felt most absent. These things were in you before the breaking. The breaking simply made them undeniable, to you, to the people around you, and to the purposes of God that are now being built on a foundation that has been tested in ways that most foundations never are. Here is the third revelation, and this is the one I want you to carry with you long after this message ends. The sequence cannot be reversed by anything that has happened to you, not by the wound, not by the failure, not by the years of confusion and waiting and carrying things in silence, not by the moments when you behaved in ways that reflected the broken place rather than the chosen one. The choosing was made before any of those things existed. It was made in a realm that those things cannot access, and it remains unchanged, unrevoked, unaffected by the evidence that the prosecuting voice in your internal courtroom keeps presenting exactly what it was before the first fracture ever formed. Chosen. My question for you today is this. If you genuinely believed, not as a concept but as a lived conviction, that you were chosen before you were broken, what would you stop withholding from your own life? What would you stop waiting to receive until you felt worthy enough to receive it? What would you stop postponing until the breaking was more fully healed? Sit with that question, let it find the places in you where the inverted sequence has been operating, because the answer to that question is the map to the life that is already yours. Let me describe what begins to happen in a life when the sequence is restored. When the truth that the choosing came before the breaking moves from intellectual acknowledgement, the place where most spiritual truths live without ever producing real change, into the lived, embodied, daily experience of someone who has genuinely received it. The first thing that changes is the relationship with rest. Not physical rest, though that changes too. The deeper rest. The rest of not having to prove anything in order to justify your existence in the spaces you occupy. The rest of walking into a room without the low-grade performance anxiety of someone who is still establishing whether they belong there. The rest of being in relationship without the constant background calculation of whether you are contributing enough to justify what you are receiving. This rest does not arrive all at once. It comes in moments first. A conversation where you notice that you are fully present, rather than partially managing how you are being perceived. A quiet morning where the familiar engine of needing to prove something is simply silent. Not suppressed, not white-knuckled into silence, but genuinely quiet in a way that feels foreign at first, and then gradually, like something you did not know you had been missing. These moments lengthen over time. They connect. And eventually what was a series of isolated experiences of rest becomes the new baseline from which you operate. The second transformation happens in the way you receive love. This is perhaps the most visible change to the people who are closest to you and the most surprising to them, because they have often been trying to reach you in the places that were protected for a long time. As the sequence is restored, as the conviction that you were chosen before you were broken settles into the foundation of your self-understanding, the wall around the receiving place begins to change character. It does not disappear immediately. Walls that were built for survival do not dismantle themselves overnight. But doors appear in the wall that were not there before. Small ones at first. Moments where someone's care actually reaches you rather than being deflected before it can land. Moments where you can say "I need something" without the sentence feeling like a confession of inadequacy. And what happens in those moments, in the moments where you actually receive rather than deflect, is extraordinary. Because the love that reaches the real place rather than the performed place produces something in you that all the years of giving without receiving could never produce. It produces the specific, irreplaceable experience of being known. Not admired, not appreciated for what you contribute, known, seen in the broken places and not found wanting, received in the real place and not rejected, and that experience repeated over time, in the relationships that are safe enough to hold it, begins to rebuild the foundation from the inside out in a way that no amount of self-work or spiritual discipline could accomplish alone. The third transformation is in the way you understand your own story. When the sequence is inverted, when you believe consciously or unconsciously that your brokenness preceded your choosing, your story reads as a tragedy with occasional moments of grace. The wound is the defining event. Everything else is either the cause of the wound, or the consequence of it, or the attempt to recover from it. The wound is the center of gravity around which the entire narrative orbits. But when the sequence is restored, when you understand that you were chosen before you were broken, the wound does not disappear from the story. But it is no longer the center. The choosing is the center. The wound becomes one chapter in a story whose first and final word was spoken by God before the wound existed. And from that repositioning, from that shift in the center of gravity of your own narrative, everything looks different. The breaking that felt like evidence against you becomes evidence of the significance of what God placed in you. The seasons of waiting that felt like abandonment become the specific corridor through which the choosing was being walked out in real time. The wounds that felt like the most defining thing about you become the specific material from which the most important parts of your assignment are being built. This is not reframing for the sake of feeling better. This is seeing accurately, seeing your life as it actually is, as it has always been, from the perspective of the one who spoke the choosing before the breaking ever began. And from that perspective, your story is not a tragedy. It has never been a tragedy. It is a revelation, unfolding exactly as it was always meant to unfold, with you broken and healing and chosen and called exactly at the center of it. Chosen. I want to finish with something I need you to carry with you into every day that follows this one. You did not earn the choosing. You cannot lose it. You cannot perform your way into a more secure version of it or behave your way out of it. It was spoken before you existed in any form that could influence it. And it has remained through every season of your breaking, through every moment of your failure, through every night when you questioned whether it was ever really yours, exactly what it was before the first word of your story was written in the visible world. The breaking was real. I am not asking you to minimize it or reframe it into something less painful than it was. The wounds were real. The cost was real. The seasons of confusion and silence and carrying things alone, they were real, and they were hard, and they are allowed to have been exactly as difficult as they were. God does not ask you to pretend that the fire was not hot. He asks you to notice that you came through it. That something in you that was always there, something that was placed in you before the breaking began, survived every single thing that was sent to destroy it. And now, on the other side of the breaking, in the middle of the healing, in the season where the sequence is being restored to its rightful order in your understanding, the question is not whether you were chosen. That was settled before time began. The question is what you will do with the life of someone who knows they were chosen before they were broken. How you will carry the wound differently when it is no longer the center of your story. How you will receive differently when the foundation beneath the receiving place has been rebuilt on the truth of an unconditional choosing. How you will step into the assignment that was written for you, not the diminished version, not the edited version that the broken place tried to substitute, but the full version, the one that was decided before you existed, the one that nothing that has happened to you has been able to revoke. That assignment is still yours. It was always yours. And you, broken and healing and more qualified by the process than you have yet fully understood, are exactly the right person to walk in it. What breaks you open is what lets the light in. Chosen and called,